So it seems that it's chapter approved this week. Points updates are inbound and a few seem to have leaked already. There's rumoured to be some major changes for how you construct armies in 40k, and by the sounds of it, a fair amount more. Hello and welcome back to Warspets Tactics, where today we're talking about the release of Chapter Approved coming at the end of this week, and what this new book is likely to mean for 40k. I thought in this video we could talk about the release of Chapter Approved, and then talk about everything that we know so far from the book. There's been a lot of stuff that's been confirmed by Games Workshop, but there's actually quite a lot of stuff that seems to have leaked that hasn't got official confirmation yet. A few really quite specific rumoured points changes, changes to certain detachments, mixing and matching sub-factions, and of course all the way that the missions will be altering. So let's take a summary and look at some of these new rumours and go through each bit one bit at a time. So first up, Games Workshop have confirmed that Chapter Approved appears to be coming this Saturday, which means that the previews for the book should be coming out around then. Chapter Approved is Games Workshop's semi-regular publication. Typically they've been releasing one per year, but in the last few it does seem to have got a little bit more regular than that, and the general purpose of it in 9th edition seems to be to reissue points and also make a few changes to the match play version of the game, new Grand Tournament missions, and often a few different changes to army construction and how you can play things if they feel that any one thing has become a bit too prevalent, or if a few restrictions might force competitive players to take an army that looks a bit more like an army and feels like it should play on the table. Chapter Approved is always seen in a semi-positive light at best. It is kind of a paid-for rules patch, and I've no doubt that Games Workshop could choose to implement it as a completely free download if they wanted to, but obviously they like to sell us books. In general though, I'm all for them rebalancing the game, shaking up 40k, and potentially trying to bring a bit more balance with the book. In general, when they do reissue points cost like this, I think it's usually a positive effect. At least some of the weakest armies in the game get a bit of a shot in the arm, and some of the things that were just fairly undercosted get a bit of a nerf. Chapter Approved is split into two different books. First up, the Munitorum Field Manual, which is the one that I'm usually a bit more interested in. New points for most of the factions in the game. There's always real potential to make things a lot more interesting, and hopefully buff the weak stuff and nerf the strong stuff. I must admit though, in Chapter Approved last year, they really didn't do very well with this. The changes they made were very light touch indeed, and while I think that the effect was still broadly positive, a lot of armies just didn't really get much attention whatsoever. I particularly remember the Tau, who'd been struggling throughout all of 9th edition. Their only points cut was just 1 point on 1 unit. I really hope that they take the opportunity to shake things up far more than that. I think that was definitely part of the reason that people were so unimpressed with the last one. If they're going to release their patches in a book like this, at least make the changes meaningful. While last time most of the missions, secondary objectives and other things tended to stay the same, this time it does look like they're looking at the Grand Tournament missions and going to be redoing them significantly. Each one of them appears to have a mild twist that makes you play differently, and also another small objective that you have to try and achieve if you do want to score maximally. They also have changed up the secondaries. It does appear that those ones are the same as they previewed in that tournament back in December. We'll talk through those in a second, and a few other really interesting rumoured changes for things like detachments and army construction. When we do get some more full details from the book, I will certainly try and cover most of the major changes for most factions like I did last time, and talk about anything interesting out of the mission changes and how it might affect how people change armies. If everything does drop on the Saturday again, I might be a little bit slower off the mark than normal. I'm afraid this coming weekend I am finally away and not going to be able to make any videos whatsoever. Probably Sunday night or Monday morning is the earliest I'll be able to get anything out. Really looking forward to digging into those points costs though, so if you'd like to see a few factions broken down, feel free to subscribe to Warspets Tactics. In any case though, let's talk through some rumours and some of these sections broken down in detail, and quickly go through what we might expect. First up for the points changes, as I mentioned, the last Chapter Approved was kind of underwhelming. Hopefully they do a little bit more this time, and it's always a big chance for a shake-up in 40k. They could literally have all the bad stuff become the best stuff in the game if they did want to adjust the points that way. I'd guess that perhaps some of the factions that are less likely to see changes might be the new Genestealer Cult and Eldar and Tau. Eldar and Tau in particular seem to have their codexes just around the corner, so I can't see Games Workshop wanting to alter the points in Chapter Approved. Though we do have a few armies that are rumoured to be getting points changes. People have basically posted a few short lists of points tweaks to the internet. No corroboration or images to go with them, so it's basically still hearsay at the moment. I must admit though, from what they've said, it does sound pretty believable. For Orcs, apparently they'd be getting some slightly more expensive commandos, squig buggies, and the beast boss on the Squigosaur. Kill rigs are apparently going up a few points as well, and a few things are getting cheaper. Some units like Mega Knobs, all the mech guns besides the custom Mega Cannon, and battle wagons are also seeing a points drop. There were a few more rumoured changes for the orcs, but they seem like some of the more interesting ones. Largely that sounds like very sensible changes indeed. Certainly battle wagons and kill rigs looked horribly balanced against each other. Mega Knobs could certainly use a points drop, and I didn't think there was much reason to take the other mech guns besides the custom Mega Cannon. Again, that wasn't a very well balanced datasheet. Hopefully we'll talk about them in an Orky video at some point later. Another really interesting rumour was that Custodians are getting sort of day one points changes very shortly after their codex. I'm sure a lot of people won't be all that impressed that their codex is now technically out of date shortly after buying it, but it does sound broadly like the Custodians will be getting a buff out of this. A rumour that was passed on to me is that playtesters felt that the codex was a fair bit underpowered from the new launch, so a fair few of the costs of the units have dropped a bit. Apparently that includes the Virtus Praetors, Trajan Valoris, and a fair few more. Though I must admit I'm kind of surprised to see Trajan Valoris dropping even more. He seems like one of the better characters in the book. Finally, there's some rumoured changes for the Sisters of Battle, including more expensive Sacrosancts and Morven Val, and a couple of buffs to things like Immolators and Exorcists. The Sisters motor ball that's kind of okay for what it does, but not particularly stand out compared with the core units. Again, I'd completely take these all as rumours at the moment. They sound perfectly believable to me, but I'm going to save going into too much depth until we actually get some pictures, or some more official confirmation that those changes are indeed happening. Otherwise, the changes to army construction were some of the things that most intrigued me. These rumours have been going around for quite a while now, and again I've certainly not seen any official confirmation of them, but they all seem plausible. First up, a nerf to sort of in-codex soup armies, and in competitive play banning different sub-factions within the same army for one codex. I think the idea being is that there isn't just a massive incentive to split your detachments in two, and take all of your shooter units in a chapter or sub-faction that's specific for shooter units, and take all of your combat-orientated ones in a much more combat-themed sub-faction. Perhaps trying to make people roll a bit more with the strengths and the weaknesses of the sub-faction that they pick, rather than souping it up. I'm not too sure about how I feel about this one if it does indeed turn out to be accurate. I quite like the idea of making creative combinations of different factions within the army, so I'm not sure I'd be all that happy to see it completely go away. I think I prefer something like a command point cost perhaps if they do want to limit it a bit. In any case, still treat that as a rumour. We'll have to wait for the full rules if there is indeed a change. Another one that appears to be confirmed is that Space Marines can't double dip on two different secondaries anymore. You previously could take one from the core codex and one from their supplement codex. This gave them more options than basically any other army in the game, and I don't really think it's going to be missed too much. Another rumour I've heard is that some of the detachments might be changing, for match play having slightly fewer fast attack and heavy support slots in a patrol detachment, maybe just to try and incentivise building towards a battalion a bit more, perhaps softly incentivising the old force organisation chart, and making it a trade-off in command points if you do want to be more flexible. That one could be interesting, though it certainly could make certain armies a little bit harder to make work on the tabletop for less command points, and drive some slightly harder choices rather than just running a couple of patrols, and a lot of more elite armies just being very happy with all the detachment slots that they could want just out of those. I also wouldn't be too surprised to see things like the reprint of the balanced data slate rules, things like the flyer change where you can only take two in an army, and maybe even the various tweaks to the other codexes that came out that time, maybe some reprinting of the 2+ save Lehman Russ, and the more general Death to the False Emperor rule on Chaos. I'll be interested to see how this chapter approved interacts with the balanced data slate. They said that will be coming out quarterly, so I wonder if that's still going to come out alongside chapter approved, even if this book's going to be making a lot of meaningful changes to the game. Otherwise, getting onto the new secondaries, we can be really quite specific here. Games Workshop did show them off in that showcase tournament in December, and it does appear that they've been confirmed with some objective markers in a white dwarf, and it doesn't seem that they've been updated at all since that tournament. The ones that have been tweaked are Engage on All Fronts, which is slightly nerfed. You now have to have 3 or more models in the unit to contest a table quarter, though vehicles and monsters can do that as just one model. Makes it a bit harder for things like characters or really tiny units to score that one, as it was a really easy one to pick before. Bring It Down seems to have been buffed a bit. That's the Killing Tanks one. Previously it wasn't picked all that much, you'd have to have quite a lot of vehicles to make it maxed. Now if you have 10 or more wounds, then you'll score 2 victory points for a vehicle killed, or 16 or more for 3 VP. It's kind of bad news for transport, they'll be giving up 2 victory points each now. and means that any sort of armour and tank spam will make it a bit easier to max this secondary. No prisoners is the one where you add up the amount of wounds killed and then divide the total by 10, and that's your victory points. I think that Games Workshop just felt that this was a tiny bit underpowered. Now there's a couple of extra victory points for this one going, an extra 1 if you kill 50 or more wounds of enemy, or an extra 2 if you kill 100 or more. That basically just functions to a small boost to the number of points you can expect out of that secondary. I suspect if you're taking it, you're pretty confident you will get 50 plus wounds killed. Deploy Teleport Homers is an infantry action one where you have to use it next to the enemy drop zone. In general, you have to survive the enemy return bombardment before that objective completes. Now apparently troops can do it on your own turn, so that'll be a lot more reliable for them if you can get them close to the enemy. And perhaps one of the most interesting changes was the one to retrieve Octarius data, which was taken really quite a lot. It was really easy to score with a lot of small units with just 1 or 2 models in. Now you have a chance of it failing if you've got less than 6 models in it, or less than 5 if you're troops. As you can only attempt it with 1 unit per turn, you're really not going to want to have any chance of it failing, otherwise it might cost you a load of victory points at the end of the game. So now this objective is only really reliable with things like 5 model troop squads, things like maybe Drukhari Racks or Guard Scions. You can interestingly now do it with biker squads as well, though in general you're only going to want to if there's a fairly big squad of them, otherwise the action's probably going to fail. Overall, I'd say that's a slight nerf to that one. It was very commonly taken. Finally, for secondaries, there was a change to Investigate Signal. It was previously a very easily countered action that you had to do in the centre of the board, where all the opponent had to do was put a unit there and then you wouldn't be able to do it. Now you can still start the action if the opponent's got models there, but you just have to kill them for the end of the turn. Stops them basically ruining your objective by just putting 1 cheap expendable unit out there that you're going to easily gun down. Finally, there's a change to Psychic Interrogation, a psychic action one where you rip some victory points from the minds of your opponent's characters. Not really a bad one if your opponent doesn't have some reliable Deny the Witch, and that's been buffed a fair bit, meaning that it no longer requires line of sight, so your opponent can't just hide characters as a counter. That one does seem a pretty reasonable one for some psychic armies to take now. It's going to be a bit easier to achieve. Interestingly, there don't seem to be any massive changes to Assassinate, no obvious changes to the killing character units, where you still get 3 victory points for each model within that character unit. I guess it's not impossible that they might FAQ that in some way, and I feel that both Pierce the Veil and Behind Enemy Lines both might have used a buff. Pierce the Veil I still think is going to be picked far less than some of the other psychic secondaries in my opinion. Overall though, it seems like largely good stuff, maybe worse for certain vehicle armies and armies with lots of tiny utility units. So I guess it might tempt some people to build armies slightly further away from those archetypes. Just throwing random units of servitors into a Space Marine list, which was usually quite a good idea, just no longer seems quite as viable. This plus the faction-specific secondaries that we saw leaked from that White Dwarf the other day means that they're going to be changing quite a bit overall. Hopefully more armies should have more viable options and less auto-includes. Finally, we've got the chapter-approved 2022 missions. Games Workshop confirmed that there were going to be 9 Strike Force and 9 Incursion ones, same as previously. And as I mentioned before, they seem to each have a twist that makes you play in a different way, and each have a mini objective as a bonus primary. This one's called Secure Missing Artifacts. The twist is that you get to redeploy some objectives. The primaries seem to be going to 4 points, 8 points or 12 points per turn now, rather than the 5, 10 and 15 that there was previously. And for this one, the bonus is to take and hold the objective in your own deployment zone. If you lose it, then you'll be losing out on 3 victory points per turn. The other preview one was Recover Relics. The twist in this one is that you only get your free command points each turn if you control an objective outside of your deployment zone, and you even get a bonus command point if you control the objective marker in your opponent's deployment zone. It means you might have to push forward a little bit more than normal. The bonus primary is kind of a mini kill points mechanic. You get 1 victory point for each enemy unit destroyed in the battle round, up to a maximum of 3 per turn. That one does give a small advantage to armies with a lower unit count, things like Custodies and Knights perhaps. Overall though, I think I do like these new missions. The previous ones felt very similar indeed, and it's nice to have a little bit of variation, both in terms of the bonus primaries, and also the mini twists that each mission has. So overall, whether or not you're the biggest fan of Chapter Approved, it perhaps looks like there's a few more interesting things in this one. In any case, I'm certainly looking to covering it in full once we have full details. Looking forward to making a few more videos on points changes on the channel. Feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics. I feel like there's going to be a fair few videos on the subject in the future. Finally, if you have been enjoying all the videos on the channel, I would just like to mention that Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page, and you can find that down in the video description. Channel patrons do get a fair few advantages, including seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things come next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some really big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, then the link is down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.